can't believe we are here yet again. I don't want to keep talking about it. But on a grid where you need two competitive drivers close to one another, Red Bull still hasn't got the memo. And they might be risking losing another star because they pushed him up the ladder far too soon. And trust me, I know a thing or two about ladders. I know what you're going to be saying, oh, you're just like everyone else, Law, with the Liam Lawson video, but at this point, it's far too simplistic to say that this is all the New Zealander's fault that he finds himself where he is. Having just watched the sprint qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix, it was probably the worst possible outcome that could have befallen him, considering where his teammate wound up, and even his teammate didn't expect to find himself where he wound up. Only 1/100th or so behind Lewis Hamilton. Even though Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen are in agreement that they find the RB21 just too slow for what they need, it's all starting to feel a little bit too harsh to just pin the blame squarely on Lawson himself. Sure, he hasn't exactly won over the wider F1 fanbase lately, but this all isn't on him. Personally, I think it all stems back to something that Dr. Marco said a couple of years ago about the situation regarding Lawson's contract with the entire group, but we will touch upon that later, so do keep watching. I don't want to just make this a basic, straightforward, Liam Lawson is cooked, oh, we always hated him. No, I want to try and be a bit fairer than that. I'm not saying he's completely devoid of any blame whatsoever, but this whole mess is completely complicated and unnecessary, and Red Bull's just finding itself again in a position akin to Pierre Gasly in 2019. You'd think they would have learnt, but they haven't, because it just shows that whoever gets in the second car is doomed to be destroyed by the Dutchman. His most recent struggles at Red Bull have sparked discussions about the challenges rookies face within the team, the internal dynamics they may hinder their development, and folks, again looking back to Pierre Gasly's opening gambit with the team 6 years ago, the Frenchman being thrust into that seat after Daniel Ricciardo skipped town. In the case of Liam Lawson, it was to do with the whole reality of what was going on with Sergio Perez with that team. Red Bull were growing weary of the situation they found themselves in when they had relinquished the Constructors' Championship and then couldn't even finish second in it. Something had to give. And considering that at that point the Red Bull Junior program finally had enough potential candidates that might be able to fill in the gap at both teams, it then came the decision after the season had finished that Sergio Perez would no longer be racing with the team. If you keep watching this video, it turns out there are far more nuances to the story than we might have thought, that maybe Checo didn't even want to be with the team anyway. But yes, it's safe to say Red Bull thought that putting Lawson in the car would take care of business, 2025 would be far less one-sided, and all will be well. However, Liam Lawson's initiation into Red Bull has been fraught with difficulties, highlighting the contrast again in how the front-running teams do things these days. Because as has been made evident with McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, all their drivers are relatively close to one another, and their driving styles seem to be very complementary with one another, the car not being developed in one specific direction, or at least not at the beginning of the season. But unfortunately, that dynamic with those three teams, it just highlights the imbalance going on at Red Bull Racing and the dynamic they have there with Max Verstappen ruling the roost. No, I'm not blaming Max specifically, because right now he is able to do the business himself alone. But how long is he prepared to be able to pick up the slack of the team? Because with the other one, at the Australian Grand Prix, Lawson was eliminated in Q1, starting 18th on the grid. He didn't finish due to a spin in wet conditions, and it really didn't help matters and his overall outlook with the fans that this incident occurred after the team opted to keep him out on slick tyres despite increasing rain. A decision that backfired as the track conditions simply worsened. They didn't get better. And also, given how much focus had been put on that second seat, the person in it, the guy replacing Checo for the previous 2 years, him struggling there as well, Red Bull effectively had thrown Liam to the lions. And then you look at what happened in China just a few hours ago. Liam Lawson, through yet again an unfortunate strategy in terms of a push-cool push lap, it actually befell the McLarens as well, which is why they weren't on the front row as well. It resulted in Liam Lawson not getting the tyres heated up properly, and he was plumb last. Oh no. I internally cringed. I felt so bad for Liam at that point. I knew that the world would tear him asunder. Because we've got to remember, in that Q1 session, he was not far behind Max. 0.4 of a second isn't terrible. But the field spread is so close right now that considering Max Verstappen was in the lower half of the roster in Q1, that 0.4 spread, that's way too much to guarantee you they're going to get into Q2. You need to be right up at the top to be able to do that. So Red Bull, they basically messed up the strategy for him, and also Liam just simply couldn't adapt to that strategy being suboptimal, because even with Piastri, it wasn't an ideal strategy, but he's still third. And regardless of team strategy, for the wider world, the casual fans, all this does is raise eyebrows, force people to scratch their heads in confusion. Why is Liam in that cart right now with only 11 races to his name prior to the season starting? And especially considering that there is one guy at Racing Bulls, the junior team, who is about to reach their 100th Grand Prix. It doesn't make any sense. But if you're asking me whether or not I'm worried that Liam Lawson could be dropped, I'm not too worried right now, because Australia, China, they're two tracks that Liam hasn't been to physically before. But if we get to the Japanese Grand Prix and these struggles continue, then the internal alarm bells will start ringing, because with Liam and Super Formula in 2023, the drivers there practically live at Suzuka. They do their testing there, they have 2 Grand Prix weekends there. But in defense, right now, Helmut Marko isn't slagging him off too much, with him acknowledging Lawson's eagerness to prove himself, though stating he wanted to show what he can do, and unfortunately, that went wrong. Marko emphasised then that Lawson will be evaluated over the next 3 to 5 races to see how his development is going. Oh dear, there's that estimated race run again. I don't think you need me to tell you that we heard similar rumblings with Daniel Ricciardo and Nick de Vries that they would have an X amount of races to prove themselves, or else their position with that team would have to be re-evaluated. But fortunately, in typical fashion, Christian Horner was able to look at the bigger picture. Say what you will about Christian Horner, but at the beginning, he is fairly forgiving of brand new drivers at his team, attributing the race incident in Australia as the team's strategic call, that the blame was on them, that they took a risk of leaving him out because, well, he was outside of the points. There was nothing to lose. Horner then also noted that Lawson posted the second fastest lap time in dry conditions during the race, highlighting his potential pace. Now, Horner's defense, that's pretty nice, just like his softening of Hadjar's post-race sting. Who is to blame for this mess Lawson finds himself in? Honestly, between Red Bull and Lawson, I think it's a little bit of both. As we know far too well, Red Bull Racing has a reputation for being the most high-pressure environment in the sport, arguably more so than the sheer imperial force that is Scuderia Ferrari, which can be challenging for rookies. Now, at the same time, the comments that I have heard from Liam Lawson have been mildly refreshing and shows that he is far less arrogant than he was this time last year. Him recognising that Red Bull is what it is, that you are expected to perform, and if you don't perform before a certain time, you are out the door. In short, he knows the game. He knows the score. I mean, just ask Gasly, Kvyat and Albon, they can tell you exactly the same thing. And the team's internal dynamics, they may not always be conducive to nurturing new talent. You could chalk that up to being the responsibility of the sister team, now known as Racing Bulls, and see whether or not you deserve a spot at the top table within the organisation, so you kick on straight away. However, I'm really starting to see a separation of concept between these two teams, that they are not really in sync, that you don't feel Racing Bulls is properly preparing their drivers for life at Red Bull Racing. Because as is plain to see, Racing Bulls, AlphaTauri, VCarb, they've been going through a period of massive transformation. The transition is reflecting a broader strategy to operate not merely as a junior team, but as their own team with their own edicts and principles. And throughout last year especially, the team hired Lauren Mekies to act as its team principal, and you saw yourself a leader who was far more understanding of their drivers and would back them to the hilt on many occasions. Really, really supportive. You felt like drivers there at Racing Bulls were cherished, even if their own strategies would sometimes set themselves up for failure. But you know what? Having watched the 6 races that Liam Lawson had with Racing Bulls or VCarb or what have you, it does make me realise something, that perhaps the transition to Red Bull Racing was far too soon, and the things that he learnt with Lauren Mekies Racing Bulls was simply not enough to equip him for the preparations that could be expected to be under the nose of Christian Horner, Max Verstappen and Helmut Marko. Simply put, Racing Bulls is not fulfilling its remit properly. This is no scorn on them. There's just a simple disconnect between the two, because they're not quite sure what they want their second team to be. What is it? A sister team? Junior team? Make up your mind! But yes, it's safe to say that last year, even though he did make a fair share of enemies, Liam Lawson, racing with them, somewhat carved out a name for himself, being quite close to Tsunoda in terms of performance and pace. Things were looking hopeful for a solid full campaign in 2025 with them. But then the call came up from on high, and the immediate pressure to perform with the senior team might have potentially curtailed the rookie's ability to grow further had he just remained at Racing Bulls. Put simply, he might have just been promoted way too early. And not to mention a car that can easily get away from anyone who's ever in the second seat. It really puts the plight and issue of Sergio Perez into a different light, that maybe the world is looking to the Mexican driver and just thinking, like Thanos, perhaps we treated you too harshly. Granted, Checo isn't fully absolved of his struggles and woes with the team, but his experiences with them for the past 4 F1 campaigns, they provide an additional perspective on the team's ethos in a way that we hadn't really seen before. And despite that bizarrely timed contract extension, admittedly not one of Christian Horner's best ever decisions to do that so early in the season, and for so little in return, Perez then parted ways with the team at the end of 2024. The last real memory that we see him associated with the team is him delivering a truckload of tequila. But there was an article that came out a few days ago that I saw, but really didn't get that much traction since people are not really paying attention to Checo at the moment. The decision for Checo to not push harder to stay with the team might have been influenced by the driver's own discomfort with Red Bull. Jimmy Morales, one of the directors of Checo's sponsors, highlighted in an interview with Formula de Dos podcast a really interesting bit of information and insight as to the final days of Red Bull racing in Checo, and also might have pointed out as to why Helmut Marko constantly got on Checo's back, that there was beef between them that goes back decades. I'll show you all right here. This is really, really fascinating. It explains a lot. There are many interests at play. Whether it's fair or not, the internal pressure and Red Bull's advice, there are too many issues involved. Our driver didn't feel comfortable anymore. Other teams had already signed other drivers by then, when we cut ties with Red Bull. We already knew Helmut Marko. He already had strong clashes with me when we were just in Formula 3. He said to me, "This driver is not going to make it," and guess what? He even made it to the team that said he wasn't going to make it. We gagged him like the big boys. Ooh, catharsis. But ultimately, Helmut had the last laugh. But again, this revelation puts the whole Marko-Checo debacle of 2023 in a whole other light. Perhaps Marko had it in for him for all of this time to get back at him for actually proving him wrong, that he did make it to Formula 1 and that he even got to Red Bull. For instance, after the 2024 Mexican Grand Prix, Marko expressed disappointment over Checo's qualifying performance and subsequent race incidents, labelling his actions as incomprehensible. Additionally, September 2023, Marko made those controversial remarks attributing Perez's fluctuating form to his ethnicity, for which he did later apologise, surprisingly and rarely. And even though we know Dr. Marko for being blunt, forthright and ruthless to a fault, and yeah, especially with the whole Isaac Hadjar bit embarrassing situation, what this really proves is that maybe at certain times, especially if we then take in 2022 into account, when Sergio Perez had that Monaco situation that really got the hackles up of the back of Max Verstappen, so he didn't play ball the rest of the season, and considering how much Marko and Max are like that, maybe that was a sign of maybe internal rumblings to try and push Checo out because things weren't so serene. Now, okay, I am going to get the spanner of speculation and the foam of doubt out for this one, but maybe after what happened in 2022, the whole Checo is a legend thing might have just become a distant memory, and that maybe there was no room for Sergio after all. And it really stands a testimony for Sergio to stick it out for that long instead of buckling at the end of 2023. He stuck it out a whole other year, but even then it proved to be too much. Now, again, speculation here, speculative, but still, it does make my mind tingle a bit. The fact, though, that Perez had been on Marko's radar for that long, casting dismissive comment after dismissive comment toward its own sponsors as well, it can't help but make you think that Sergio had many crosses to bear at the team. This doesn't relieve him of all the responsibility for failing to provide Red Bull the results when they needed them, but it certainly casts a new perspective on the matter. And this could provide some momentum for him to maybe make a possible return to F1 with Cadillac next season. But what this entire situation with Sergio Perez and Liam Lawson has really highlighted, yet again, to remind people who are brand new to Formula 1 as well, it may not be the suitable environment for a rookie to thrive after all. It just goes to show you really need to have quite a few races under your belt if you hope to survive there. 11 races? That's far too little. Alex Albon, I mean, props to him for sticking it out for just 12 races before he got promoted. The second half of 2019 wasn't too bad at all. I reiterate, the fact that Liam Lawson got pulled out of Racing Bulls far too early, it means that his chance to develop and grow it means that he has to sink or swim. He hasn't got the comforting, nurturing mechis to help protect him at Racing Bulls and defend him to the hilt. There is not that limited pressure, because as we know with that team, Toro Rosso, what have you, you usually get 2 or 3 years to really find your footing. That was one of the famous edicts of the former team principal Franz Tost, that you needed 3 seasons to really understand whether or not you're cut out for Formula One. But I think the thing that really makes this story sting and makes it all on Liam Lawson's shoulders, this is why he's mostly responsible for why he finds himself in a position where people really want him to fail, is that during his second tenure, he really did not make a good impression with many different fandoms in the sport, particularly the fans of a certain Daniel Ricciardo. Because as that man had such a disastrous manner of departing Formula One at Singapore, it's now making fans of him just go, we had to give up him for him? But as Dr. Marco said in that comment I shared with you earlier, Liam simply just wanted to show what he could do. And what he could do was get the hackles up of not just several drivers, but also their fans. With each passing weekend, all of the goodwill that he managed to manifest in 2023 with AlphaTauri, out-qualifying Max Verstappen, scoring points at Singapore, one of the toughest races on the calendar, all of that was thrown to the wayside. People didn't care about that. Fans really get behind their drivers now. Drivers are supported in their individual selves, not just them being part of a team. And with Liam Lawson picking fights with Checo and Alonso, and then having cast Daniel Ricciardo to the shadow realm, let's just say that he, and also getting in the way and impeding in certain events, so you get people complaining about Liam on the radio. Yeah, it's safe to say that many different fandoms are not exactly endeared to Liam. Basically, Liam didn't make any friends in the paddock, but then you could clap back and say that you're not there in F1 to make friends, but you could clap back to that and say that you would be better not to make enemies. And then what made matters worse was the decision of the higher-ups at Red Bull Racing to put him in the RB21 instead of Yuki Tsunoda, who on paper is far more qualified to take the role as Max Verstappen's second. And also, there wasn't really much risk attached to it. Sure, Yuki might have sunk out, but he was only going to be with the camp for 1 more year since Honda were departing for 2026 over to Aston Martin, so what would be the harm in Christian giving it a go and just giving him a 1-year deal or something like that? Allow Lawson to develop at Racing Bulls, have a full campaign under his belt, and then he could be ready for Red Bull in 2026, and then if Max decides to go, Liam might lead the team, he might have prospered, who knows? It would have been a much more gradual process, but no, there was an element of being rushed into the seat. And as much as I find it incredibly bizarre, I don't want to go down the angle that you think I might be going down and saying, injustice for Yuki! I feel like it does go back to that thing I mentioned near the beginning of this video, and a particular statement that Helmut Marko made regarding Liam and his contract with the overall Red Bull group. That maybe this might not have been this promotion to Red Bull Racing a sign of confidence in him, but just to make sure that no one else could get him. Kind of like how they locked in Yuki for 2025 so no one else could get him. Could this promotion be less of a test in faith in Lawson and more of a business decision to prevent millions of dollars of development into his career being exploited by another team? Note Piastri, Alpine, McLaren. For me, this promotion is now rekindling the sparks of speculation I had in this notion. This whole situation with Liam in the car next to Max, it's not a reward for the Kiwi, it's a strategic move for Red Bull. All this would do would be to confirm for me that Liam Lawson was rushed into that car, that Yuki's snubbing was political. And you might be thinking, well, hang on, Law, it suggested that Liam would be in a Red Bull car for 2025. He would have been able to fulfill that at Racing Bulls, right? Well, let's talk about Isaac Hadjar for a moment, because one thing was absolutely clear. No matter where Isaac would finish in the 2024 F2 Championship, it would have been higher than any position Liam Lawson got. And even though Isaac lost out to Gabriel Bortoleto at the final race of the season, he still came home second. And had it been not for technical foul-ups with Campos and strategic blunders from the management there, Isaac might have romped to victory by, according to Marco, 80 points lost or so it could have been a complete domination from the little Frenchman. And considering that champions in F2 don't get to stick around for another season, Red Bull had no choice but to put Isaac there next to Yuki. No room in the inn there, so therefore he would have had no choice but to be put into Red Bulls. So basically, you could argue, and okay, there's a little bit of doubt in this one, that maybe the spunkiness and confidence in Liam's management might have set him up for a real test of might and will and determination. I mean, if this pulls itself off and Liam rises to the occasion, then great. But if it doesn't, then, oh. And it really helped that Checo had little will to fight on to stay at Red Bull for 2025. In the end, the saga surrounding Liam is not a simple tale of individual shortcomings or an outright indictment of Red Bull's management. It's a really tangled drama of high-pressure expectations, internal politics, and rushed decisions. Lawson's on-track aggression has drawn criticism, but this promotion? It might be less about performance, but, much like with Tsunoda last year, a means of Red Bull to lock in a driver they've pumped so many resources into so that no other team could actually capitalise on it. Because you remember all of the rumours that Lawson might have gone to Williams for 2025 or something like that, or 2024? Even though Liam did say, I would rather stay at Red Bull, that was a really burning rumour for quite a while back in the day. All the while, the traditional pathway going from Racing Bulls to Red Bull Racing is becoming blurred, that it's not fully representative or suitable or adequate for any brand new hopeful rookie to have just maybe one season at Racing Bulls. You go to the senior team, are you really prepared for it? Is there a complete and utter mismatch with the way those two teams are managed? That, sure, it's really nice to see Laura Mecki's backing his drivers up to the hilt, but it's really not representative of what you could expect when you get to Red Bull Racing when Helmut Marko's breathing down your necks, although technically he is no longer the boss of you since you're no longer a junior. It's leaving us to wonder if this relentless crucible is nurturing a future champion or simply sacrificing another hopeful in the ruthless quest for instant success, because let's be real, the last time a real Red Bull junior who was still racing for their banner at the time got on the podium was one Pierre Gasly. Yuki Tsunoda came close in Abu Dhabi 21 with a fourth, but as many people like to point out, Yuki doesn't count because Honda. But the situation is this. Either the Red Bull Junior program is not capable of producing a driver that is capable of cutting it at Red Bull Racing ultimately, or perhaps they are capable of producing talent, but they're not given enough time in which to grow and develop. And what is really not helped is the fact that in recent years, we have seen the tolerance levels of rookies being able to hit the ground running get shorter and shorter. Probably driven on by the fact of how much Russell, Norris and Albon kicked on in 2019. And now with these brand new rookies, Behrman, Antonelli, what have you, the tolerance level is only going to get shorter. That only after maybe one or two races, maybe even just after testing, if you're not good enough, then you could be cast out or derided by the fandom unless you do your absolute utmost in the social media department. Because when you look back at it, it was a miracle that Pierre Gasly was able to survive all of that with Red Bull and then be able to forge his own destiny and make a name for himself with Alpine. Yeah, I know that's not really saying much, but at least he's able to do something there. And as for Yuki, well, yeah, maybe this whole situation of him being overlooked was political. A game of contractual cat and mouse. Well, maybe in this situation, Yuki, he's the dog. And as could be implied by Honda redefining their relationship with him, now no longer getting full support from them but instead just cool hard cash, could this be the stimulus package that Yuki needed to create a bespoke management team to salvage a future in F1, not necessarily with Red Bull? To find out why I think this could have been the best thing to happen to Tsunoda and perhaps future Japanese F1 talent, watch this video next, straight after this one.